A love song becomes a curse. Two men create a masterpiece that conquers the world, and both die without seeing a penny from it. This is the story of Without You, the ballad that made millionaires out of everyone who touched it, except the two songwriters who poured their hearts into every note. Pete Ham and Tom Evans wrote a song so powerful that Paul McCartney called it the killer song of all time. Harry Nilsson took it to number 1. Mariah Carey did the same 22 years later. Over 180 artists have recorded it. It has been played at weddings, funerals, in films, on television, and in restaurants across the globe for more than 50 years. But Pete Ham never met his daughter. Tom Evans was found hanging from a willow tree by his 6-year-old son. Both died penniless, destroyed by a music industry that celebrated their genius while stealing their future. This is their story. This is the tragedy of Badfinger. Swansea, Wales, 1961. Pete Ham is a 15-year-old with a guitar and a dream that burns brighter than the gray skies over his working-class neighborhood. He's not just talented, he's extraordinary. By 17, he's fronting a local band called the Panthers, playing covers in youth clubs and church halls, his voice already carrying that aching vulnerability that would one day break hearts around the world. Pete Ham wasn't supposed to be a rock star. He was supposed to work in a factory, maybe settle down with a local girl and live a quiet life. But there was something in him that couldn't be contained, a melodic gift that seemed to flow from somewhere beyond himself. His friends would later say that writing songs was as natural to Pete as breathing. He didn't struggle or strain. The music just came. 300 miles north in Liverpool, the crucible of British rock and roll, another young musician was finding his path. Tom Evans. Where Pete was gentle and introspective, Tom was fiery and passionate. A bass guitarist with movie star looks and a voice that could soar to the rafters, Tom had been playing in Liverpool bands since the early 60s, riding the wave of Beatlemania that had turned his hometown into the center of the musical universe. By 1968, fate brought them together. Pete's band, the Ivies, needed a bass player. Tom Evans walked through the door and something clicked. Pete and Tom weren't just bandmates. They became brothers, collaborators, the creative engine of what would soon become Badfinger. And then came the break every struggling musician dreams of, the Beatles' Apple Records. The label that promised to nurture artists, to protect them from the sharks and vultures of the music industry. Paul McCartney himself took an interest in the Ivies, seeing something of the Beatles' own early innocence in these young Welsh and English lads. In 1968, they signed with Apple. In 1969, they became Badfinger. And in 1970, they released Come and Get It, a song written and produced by McCartney that shot to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. Badfinger had arrived. They were hailed as the next Beatles, the torchbearers of melodic rock. 4 talented musicians, Pete Ham on guitar and vocals, Tom Evans on bass and vocals, Joey Molland on guitar and vocals, and Mike Gibbons on drums, who could write, sing, and play with a sophistication that belied their youth. They appeared in the Beatles' film The Magic Christian. They recorded at Abbey Road Studios. They socialized with rock royalty. The future looked golden, but in the music industry, nothing is ever quite as golden as it seems. Late 1970, Badfinger is working on their second album, No Dice. The pressure is on. Their debut album had been a modest success, but Come and Get It had been written by McCartney. The band needed to prove they could create hits on their own, that they weren't just pretty faces propped up by Beatles connections. Pete Ham sits at the piano in the studio. It's late. The others have gone home, but Pete stays, as he always does, chasing a melody that has been haunting him. He's thinking about love, about his girlfriend, about the ache of separation, about what it means to need someone so desperately that the thought of being without them is unbearable. His fingers find the chords. Simple, descending, melancholic. And then the words start coming. He writes the verses quickly, almost automatically. The song pours out of him in a rush of emotion, but something isn't quite right. The chorus, the emotional climax, won't come. He works at it for hours, but can't find the perfect expression of that devastating feeling. Enter Tom Evans. When Pete plays him the unfinished song the next day, Tom immediately feels it. He hears what Pete is reaching for. And in that mysterious alchemy that happens between true collaborators, Tom writes the chorus, the soaring, heartbreaking refrain that would become one of the most recognized passages in popular music history. Together, Pete and Tom have created something extraordinary, a song that captures the universal experience of heartbreak with devastating simplicity. No elaborate metaphors, no clever wordplay, just raw, honest emotion wrapped in a melody that seems to have existed forever, waiting for someone to discover it. But here's the cruel irony. Pete and Tom don't think much of it. They record it for no dice, but it's buried as an album track. Not a single, not a priority, just another song in a catalog of what they assume will be many more. They have no idea that they've just written their masterpiece, that this song will outlive them, outlast them, and ultimately define them. When No Dice is released in November 1970, critics praise Badfinger's songwriting. The album sells respectably. But Without You barely registers. It's a deep cut. A footnote. And then one day in 1971, a phone call comes that will change everything. Harry Nilsson is listening to No Dice on a friend's sound system. He's already a successful artist, a singer's singer, beloved by critics and fellow musicians, if not quite by the masses. He has an extraordinary voice, 3 octaves of pure emotion, and he's always looking for the perfect song to showcase it. When Without You plays, Nilsson stops mid-conversation. He rewinds the track, plays it again and again. "That's my song," he says. "That's the song I've been waiting for." Nilsson books studio time with producer Richard Perry, one of the best in the business. They approach Without You not as a simple cover, but as a grand emotional statement. They add orchestration, sweeping strings that build and build. They shape the arrangement like a classical piece, starting small and intimate, then exploding into a cathartic crescendo. And Nilsson sings it with every ounce of passion his remarkable voice can muster. The result is transcendent. When Nilsson's version of Without You is released in October 1971, it doesn't just become a hit, it becomes a phenomenon. It reaches #1 in the United States, #1 in the United Kingdom, #1 in over a dozen countries worldwide. It sells millions of copies. It earns Grammy nominations. It makes Harry Nilsson a household name. And for Pete Ham and Tom Evans, it should have been the beginning of a fairy tale. They're songwriters who've just written the biggest hit in the world. Publishing royalties should be pouring in, recognition should be following. This is their yesterday, their something, a standard destined to generate income for decades. Except that's not what happens. Because between Pete Ham, Tom Evans, and the money that Without You is generating stands a man named Stan Polly, intact. Stan Polly doesn't look like a villain. In his well-tailored suits and thick-rimmed glasses, he looks like every other businessman in the music industry. He speaks smoothly, makes promises easily, and somewhere along the way, Badfinger, 4 talented but naive young musicians signed over control of their careers to him. Pauly becomes their manager in 1970. He convinces them that he has their best interests at heart, that he'll protect them, guide them, make them rich. The boys from Swansea and Liverpool who know how to write songs but nothing about publishing mechanical royalties or contract negotiations trust him completely. It's the worst mistake they'll ever make. As Without You conquers the world, while Harry Nilsson performs it on television and radio stations play it endlessly while the money starts flowing. Stan Polly controls where it goes. He sets up a labyrinth of companies and offshore accounts. Money that should have gone to Badfinger disappears into these corporate shells. When Pete and Tom ask about their royalties, Polly shows them complicated paperwork, makes vague promises, and assures them everything is being handled properly. The band members are living on modest weekly allowances while their song is making millions. But it's worse than simple theft. Polly's mismanagement creates a nightmare of legal complications. Publishing rights become tangled. Royalty payments are frozen in disputes. Warner Bros., Badfinger's new record label after Apple Records collapses, withholds funds because no one can determine where the money is supposed to go. And through it all, Badfinger keeps working. They released Straight Up in 1971, an album many critics consider their masterpiece, produced by George Harrison and Todd Rundgren. They released Ass in 1973 and Wish You Were Here in 1974. Pete Ham continues to write beautiful songs, day after day, Baby Blue, melodies that showcase his extraordinary gift. But the joy is draining out of it. The innocence is gone. Pete and Tom start to realize what's happened to them, that they've been robbed, that the man they trusted has betrayed them. that the success of Without You, rather than setting them up for life, has trapped them in a web of financial and legal chaos. By 1974, the walls are closing in. Warner Bros., frustrated by the management fiasco, refuses to release Badfinger's latest album. The band's income dries up completely. Pete Ham, the gentle genius who just wanted to make music, is staring at bankruptcy. His girlfriend is pregnant. He's supposed to be a successful songwriter, yet he can't even pay his bills. The stress is crushing him. April 23rd, 1975. Pete Ham received a devastating phone call from the United States. Every penny he had was gone. That night, shaken and overwhelmed, he met up with Tom Evans. The two of them went to the White Hart pub in Surrey, where Ham downed 10 whiskeys in silent despair. Evans drove him home around 3 a.m. on April 24th, 1975. A few hours later, in the garage studio of his home in Woking, Pete Ham hanged himself just 3 days before his 28th birthday. He left a suicide note addressed to his girlfriend, Anne Harriet, and her young son, Blair. In it, he expressed his love for them both and placed much of the blame for his despair on their manager, Stan Pauly. The note ended with a chilling final line. Anne, I love you. Blair, I love you. I will not be allowed to love and trust everybody. This is better. Pete, P.S. Stan Pauly is a soulless bastard. I will take him with me. 27 years old, one of the most talented songwriters of his generation, gone. The music world reacts with shock and grief. Paul McCartney is devastated. George Harrison is heartbroken. Fellow musicians who knew Pete's kindness and talent struggle to understand how it came to this. But those closest to Pete understand exactly how it came to this. The betrayal, the financial ruin, the feeling that everything he had worked for, everything he had created, had been stolen from him. The weight of it all became too much to bear. Tom Evans is shattered. He's lost his best friend, his creative partner, his brother. The guilt is overwhelming. The sense that he should have seen how desperate Pete had become, should have done something to help him. But life continues. Tom has to continue. He tries to keep Badfinger going with Joey Molland. They record new albums, tour, and try to recapture some of what they once had. But it's never the same. How could it be? The heart of the band is gone, and all the while, Without You keeps playing. Harry Nilsson's version becomes a staple of adult contemporary radio. Other artists keep recording it. The song lives on, eternal and beautiful, completely disconnected from the tragedy of its creation. In 1994, nearly 20 years after Pete's death, Mariah Carey releases her version of Without You. It's a massive hit, number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 1 in over half a dozen countries. A new generation discovers the song. Carey's powerful voice brings it to millions who've never heard Nilsson's version, who've never heard of Badfinger, who have no idea about Pete Ham and Tom Evans. Tom Evans should be celebrating. Another enormous hit, more royalties, more recognition for the song he co-wrote. But by 1983, Tom's life has become its own nightmare. The legal battles over Without You continue. Disputes over songwriting credits with Joey Molland turn bitter. The years of stress, of fighting for what is rightfully his, of watching others profit from his work while he struggles, have taken their toll. Tom is drinking heavily. His marriage is falling apart. Depression consumes him. November 19th, 1983. Richmond, London. Tom Evans walks into his garden studio, the same kind of place where Pete Ham ended his life 8 years earlier. 8 years that Tom has spent trying to hold on to something. His dignity, his rights, his sanity. He's only 36 years old, but he's tired. So tired of fighting. Tired of an industry that chews up artists and spits them out. Tired of the battles over a song that was supposed to be a blessing but became a curse. Tom Evans took his own life by hanging from a willow tree behind his home in Richmond, England. He left no note. 2 gifted songwriters, 2 gentle souls, 2 suicides in the same manner, 8 years apart, both destroyed by the very system that was supposed to celebrate and protect artistic talent. The tragedy is complete. Today, Without You is considered one of the greatest ballads ever written. It appears on lists of the best love songs of all time. It's been covered by everyone from Shirley Bassey to Glenn Campbell, from Frank Sinatra to Il Divo. It has generated millions upon millions of dollars in royalties over the decades. And Pete Ham and Tom Evans never saw any of it. Stan Polly, the manager who betrayed them, was eventually investigated by the FBI and convicted of mail fraud in an unrelated case in 1991. But by then, it was too late for Pete and Tom. The money he stole from them was never recovered. The careers he destroyed could never be rebuilt. The lives lost could never be restored. Badfinger's story has become a cautionary tale in the music industry, a stark reminder of what happens when naive artists trust the wrong people, when contracts aren't read carefully, when business acumen matters as much as talent. Music schools and artist advocacy groups use Badfinger as an example of everything that can go wrong. But their story is more than a cautionary tale. It's a tragedy in the classical sense. Talented individuals destroyed by forces beyond their control and by the very success they sought. Pete Ham's daughter, born after his death, grew up never knowing her father except through his music. Tom Evans' family was left to grieve a man who should have been celebrating his achievements instead of being broken by them. The surviving members of Badfinger, Joey Molland and Mike Gibbons, carried the weight of their friends' deaths for the rest of their lives. Yet the music endures. When you hear Without You, whether it's Nilsson's soaring version, Carey's powerful interpretation, or any of the hundreds of other recordings, you're hearing Pete Ham at a piano, chasing a melody in the late hours of the night. You're hearing Tom Evans finding the perfect words for heartbreak. You're hearing two young men who believed in the power of music to express what words alone cannot. They wrote a song about the unbearable pain of losing someone you love. They couldn't have known that the song itself would become a monument to their own loss, that we would lose them, that the world would lose their future songs, their future collaborations, all the beauty they might have created if they had been protected instead of exploited.